Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review. And in this video I'm going to review Folkesange by Myrkur. This is the third album of Myrkur aka Amalie Brun, released on RELAPSE Records. She had a weird music path over the years since Amalie started as a musician and singer in some indie rock bands, and then she get into her solo project as Myrkur with a combination of black metal music and folk. Of course, due to this change of direction, all of the elitists in the black metal community would love to hate on Myrkur. She's one of those names in the black metal community that I've seen a lot of people sort of hate on her, but I don't really get why. I mean, truth be told, speaking of the music, her previous two albums didn't really bring something that much into the black metal scene. They were just your standard black metal albums. Although, can you really say that she's an entirely black metal artist now? Because pretty much half of the stuff in both of her previous albums, if not more, was just folk music, traditional folk music, going more into the Norwegian style. And she also has made some tracks that go to the more traditional side of things with traditional instruments, taking samples with tracks like Va Konun Gabarn that got her most popular song, mainly because of this beautiful short video clip with this very weird traditional instrument that you don't usually see being put in music. So those two first albums from Myrkur were just some decent, okay black metal albums with also some okay and decent elements of Nordic folk music, and that was just about it. In this third album though, Folkesange, as it seems with the title itself, she goes straight up into just Nordic folk music. There is absolutely not a single smidge of metal music throughout this entire thing. And I didn't know what to say about this, whether I was about to like this as much or not. And I find it kind of refreshing and interesting that this album was actually put in Relapse Records, since the label is known for putting out metal stuff, whether it is with extreme metal scene or just normal metal scene or just experimental stuff. So this album is really out of their league. Even if the previous two albums had elements of the folk music, at least they would have the metal identity to them, which is something that it's not the case whatsoever with Folkesange. So I didn't know what to expect based on how much I would like this album or not, because here's the thing with traditional music in general. I'm not that much into the genre, and I'm not saying that it's just with traditional Norwegian folk music. I mean, it's just with traditional music in general. Even when it comes to, like, in some of my stuff from Greece, I'm not really that much into anything that has to do with tradition. I've got to be pretty honest with you. I am pretty biased when it comes to traditional music from all around the world, mainly because for me traditional music gets way too specific. Of course, you can have some exceptions here and there with artists taking some more out there and some more experimental approaches, but really when it comes to your traditional stuff, it's just based on some really standard and some quite predictable ideas. And so, to my surprise, Folkesange is an album that I enjoyed a lot. I can go as far to say that this is my favorite album from Myrkur by far compared to her previous two releases, and this is a very nice breath of fresh air for me. I am so pleasantly surprised with the beautiful atmosphere surrounding this entire project, how beautiful, how atmospheric it is, and how it managed with just simple ideas based around traditional music to grab my attention that much. Like, I don't remember the previous two albums from Myrkur having that well-made Nordic folk stuff, but with half of the songs being Nordic folk and the other half of the album being black metal tracks, of course there would be a loss of balance, and so the two previous albums didn't really manage to get a specific focus on one genre, so it ended up being kind of a mess. On the other hand, since this album, Folkesange, is entirely focused on the Nordic folk scene, this is where, in my opinion, we get the most focused and the most fleshed out work from Myrkur. This album is great. I love the atmosphere to it, and I love how epic it is at times, how gorgeous it is, and when it comes to all of the traditional elements, it relies on some main things that make this such a gratifying experience. For one, I think the performances on here are quite solid. I like all of the folk elements, I like the classical instrumentations, anything that has to do with like the violins, the way they're performed, the piano ballads, anything when it comes to the songwriting and the music and the structure is paced in a very nice way. The whole orchestration to this thing works beautifully with some immaculate performances, and what's great about all of those performances is that they're also produced well. The production and the sound on this thing is very clear, and it gives a very nice emphasis and balance in everything. Then the other thing that really wins me to this album are the vocals from Myrkur, since I don't really remember Myrkur having that much of a great voice. I remember that she had some quite nice vocals in her previous two albums, but it's with Folkesange where I think she shines as a singer. Her whole approach to this more traditional side of folk music, it made for a very nice album with some very emotional and very powerful vocal ranges from Amalie. But apart from everything that has to do with its marvelous sound, production and performance, it is also masterfully crafted. The ideas presented on this album are quite simple. There's not something that feels really that confusing in all of those performances. There are some quite simple structures and melodies that are effective enough in order to get stuck in your head, which is pretty much the main thing this album needs, and it succeeds in this factor. The ideas presented, the melodies, they're quite simple and they're gratifying enough in order to get memorable. And starting with one of the main singles, Ella, the album gets you really well into the mood with its sort of epic classical instrumentation and this repeated sound of like a big sort of tom being played in the background in its really repetitive fashion. And towards the second half we get some impressive vocal ranges from Amalie, which are really good, and they drag really nicely, progressing to the song and making it even more epic up until the finish. Fager Rose is one of the shorter tracks, and it's very well executed with its simple idea and the way it just pans out throughout the entirety of the song. The track Leaves of Yggdrasil, which is also one of the main singles teasing towards the release of this album, I wouldn't say that this was one of my favorites. I think that it's a decent track with some nice ideas to it, but that's pretty much about it. Because as far as I love this album, it's not like a flawless masterpiece, but there are also no tracks over here that are sort of forgettable or are weak in any sort. Instead, I would say that even some of the weaker moments on this album are actually quite decent and quite enjoyable, and they fit really well in pretty much anything this whole album builds up to. In my opinion, some of those weaker moments come towards halfway through the album with the tracks Vilje, Harpens, Kraft, and also with Gammelkäring. I think that those tracks, as far as they're beautiful and they enhance pretty well this whole experience with the production and the performances and the vocals, I think that when it comes to the ideas, they are just a bit more empty. I think that there could have been more to them in terms of the orchestration. And it's also kind of the same with the track Winter, which, as far as I love the melody to it and I like it a lot, it feels kind of empty. Pretty much anything else though on this album is superb, and it is remarkable in its own way, managing to be memorable with just simple and effective ideas. Because keep in mind, in my opinion, I don't think that this album really does anything different for Nordic folk music or Nordic folk standards, because when it comes to those terms of music, usually anything that has to do with tradition, there is put a standard to it, which is obviously not necessarily a bad thing, since we have albums like this, which keeps the traditional elements pretty strongly and it's greatly executed. For me, out of everything in this track listing, my favorite song has to be Thor i Helheim, which is a 7-minute track, which is kind of repetitive in a sense that it just keeps up the same melody, but it definitely has the most infectious melody out of this entire project. It has just got stuck in my head. It starts off with an a cappella introduction which goes for around a minute, and then it gets to this beautiful and so soothing piano melody with all of those vocals accompanying them. There is a certain melody surrounding this entire track and repeating itself, and when there's not vocals, the exact same melody is being repeated with a violin or a string section, which is something that is pretty standard and pretty predictable, and it's something that it's also being put in other moments in this whole album. And like I said, Thor i Helheim, it is a track I love. I would expect that it would also go a bit more epic as it would progress. I was hoping that it would get more grand and more dynamic as the song would progress, which was not the case, but even in its soothing pace for this 7-minute mark, it was still such an amazing experience. Other highlights for me are the short and straightforward Ramund, which contains some of Amalie's best vocal inflections and some of the greatest structures out of everything that is put in this album. Then there's also the track House Carpenter, which is one of the more energetic moments in this album. It is a more of a fast-paced folk song going closer to a country vibe, and it is very, very well done. And there's also the final teaser track, Gudernes Vilje, which is a great song. It takes a while to really pick up with its main melody, as the first minute or so it just stays in this a cappella side, but when it gets, it has definitely one of the greatest guitar melodies out of this entire project. So overall, this album was an extremely pleasant surprise. For a guy who is pretty biased in anything that has to do with traditional music, I got into this album really open-minded, and I ended up getting one of the greatest albums I've ever heard in this sort of sound. The way everything incorporates, the way everything enhances in this whole album with its performances, with the whole orchestration and instrumentation, the vocals, the production, anything in this album feels like it has a great purpose to it. The words I could use in order to describe this album is beautiful, gorgeous, stunning. There is a great atmosphere to it. This is by far miles better than anything else Amalie Brand has done so far. If there's gonna be a next album from Myrkur, I expect it to sound like this, with just the straightforward Nordic folk sections, and I can say that this is my favorite album of 2020 so far. What a pleasant surprise this is. I'm going to give Folkesange an 8 plus out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.